is confronting what I would call the horrifying ridiculousness of racism. It's horrifying because something so ridiculous, and I'm not saying, you know, race is something we should never think about, we should all kumbaya, but the way people deal with it and have dealt with it and enforced codes around it is horrifyingly ridiculous. It's horrifying because you're basically turning human beings into cartoon characters that you can sort of act out your own will upon, that you can watch certain kinds of performances. Take the very popular Negrobilia or African Americana of the little dancing coon figure that you can make tap dance by winding up. You'll see that his legs kind of tap dance on something else. Well, let's slant rhyme that with the legs of somebody being lynched, right? You have this sort of toy that you can watch and you can play with. These things were spectacles, they were entertainment. The important thing about the postcards is that this wasn't something that happened surreptitiously necessarily. This was something that everybody said, and I make the best pies in town, dead Negro, that kind of thing. So there's this ridiculous quality to it. In a recent incident, 1998, James Byrd Jr. Was dragged to his death behind a pickup truck in Jasper, Texas. He was pulled behind the pickup truck. I'm gonna have to get in front to show you this. A lot of people, when I thought of it, when I first heard about it, before I read about it, I assumed he was dragged, like if that's the back of the pickup truck, I assumed he was dragged like this. But the truth is he was dragged like this. So that he's not seeing the back of the, oh, I'll show you again. Stand up, come on now. I'm not gonna stay down here all day. So, as opposed to just seeing this blank back and the red lights of the back of the truck, he was actually seeing where he had been. Conceivably, he could see him losing himself. Now, we've seen that kind of image in slapstick. Testimony says that at one point he came loose of the chain. They backed the truck over him, boom, 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 then back, boom, boom, to reattach him. You'd see that in a cartoon. You'd see that in a sitcom. You'd see that in a comedy movie. And what you'd hear was, yeah, where did Jake go? Not you, Jake. Sorry. where did Bill go? Where did Bill go? I don't know. And that would be, you know, the joke. We'd be like, ah! That would be really funny. And I imagine it was funny to the three men at that time too. So there is this quality of ridiculousness. When you think of the sort of abstracted, exaggerated face of a minstrel painting, black face, big white eyes, big white or red lips. Think about Bosco. Think about Felix. Think about Mickey Mouse. Those are actual character design bases of it, because the significations, the codes that these audience would have recognized as somebody who was a virtuosic performer, but would get into scrapes, could be sometimes a coward, was always trying to think of a way out of work, that was the visual reference that they had to use. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, Jennifer Quandaz, and something sort of struck me about this conversation. We were talking about approaches to writing race. And what I realized is that a lot of my kind of metaphors, like Thomas was talking about, his life on the playground and the study stuff and all that, a lot of my stuff comes from cars, driving in cars. And when it comes to dealing with racist imagery in my poetry, a lot of times I'm playing chicken with the full representation of the image. So here I come, I'm driving towards it. Say in The Despair of Existence, in about the middle of the page, I don't know if I can call them stanzas, to look away is to be a ninny, you know, to look is to be a masochist. That's dodging. I played chicken and I moved at the last second. But in the other poem that I'll be reading today, Swim Chant for Nigger Merfolk, that's a crash, isn't it? When you play chicken, sometimes you dodge, and sometimes you crash. Now, two great critics have said the following line. One is Aretha Franklin, and another is Vanessa Place, who asked the question, who's zooming who? It reflects the question that we had earlier about when are the tropes or the tools using you, right? And I'm really fascinated by that as it connects to the question of eros in particular, which isn't the connection that was made in our early questionnaire. But when I think of eros, and I think about who's zooming who, I can't help but think of sadomasochism. If you want to get beat, doesn't that transform the nature of being beaten? I don't know. It's a question of dominance, right? But it definitely confuses the question, which draws me to think of people like Carol Walker, whose work was a direct influence on a piece like So Champion of the Merfolk, where she is adding to a mix something that we have oftentimes in our sort of, reclaiming of the history of a plantation environment, for example, have wished to completely eliminate all possibility of. We try to purify the idea that there was ever pleasure for anyone but the oppressor. And I've seen this reflected as a light-skinned, high-yellow dude, that it's much more comfortable in certain circles for me to say, yeah, well, I'm light-skinned because at some point in history, some Irish person, with the last name Kearney, raped my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, right? Much more horrible in that moment might be the possible consideration that it wasn't rape. That's not to say it's never rape, but to say it's always rape is also potentially ahistorical. So Carol Walker plays that game with us when we look at her images. This is why I think her silhouettes, the static silhouettes that you've seen her work, are much more effective than the video work. Because the video gives you the narrative, well, who did it? Who's making this happen, right? Whereas the static work, you're forced to decide, well, did Uncle Remus make little Tommy give him a blowjob? Or did, little Tommy say, hey, nigga, you belong to me, and I want to suck your black cock? Who knows? So, I'm going to read a couple of poems now. The first, because, I don't even know how these are going to come out, so I want to, save my ringer for last. I'm going to do the Black Automaton and Disparate Resistance, number 3, How Can I Be Down, first. I know it's not fair to ask you to do something that talk through the activity.